Hello, everyone. My name's John Anderson. I've been toying with this idea for quite a while of, creating a video blog for board gaming. So more board game design and development. Um, we have this board game that three friends of mine and I have been working on for a while, off and on. We all work, so we've been working on it off and on in our spare time. And interestingly enough, it's a concept that I had come up with as a kid. I was probably 13 or 14. And then, some friends of mine and I had played it for a while. And then we just kind of scrapped it. I went into the military and all that kind of stuff. Started my own business. So I never got back to it until I got into board gaming. And then a friend of mine, Ben, and I were just talking about, we love board gaming. We have over 300 board games. But how do we create our own? We're interested in taking some of the ideas that we had and in creating our own game, which I'm sure is kind of the same for most board game developers. So we came up with this. We took that concept that I had from when I was a kid, and we created this game that right now we're calling Labrys. Labrys is an interesting word. It is the root for labyrinth, but it also has another meaning. Basically means double-edged axe. And one of the things that we really liked about our game is we really wanted players to have to make choices, right? So we wanted them to for every action that they did that was helpful to them, we wanted it to kind of, have a consequence. And so it's funny, just the other day, I was running a teen board game night and we were playing this game. And I didn't say anything at all to one of the kids playing, but he's like, man, this is really a game about consequences and choices. So that was really cool. Let me flip this camera around and let you guys take a look at the game board as it is right now. It is still a prototype. I wanted to kind of get some artwork onto a board and so people could kind of see what the concept was. All of the artwork is ours. Let me go ahead and flip it around. All of this artwork is ours. So I have the benefit of owning an animation studio. So I had some of this artwork made by some friends of mine and I. Some of it is just placeholder art, so like these tiles will be placeholder art. This was an initial rough painting for the game board. We found that the grid was a little too light, too hard to see, especially in some of the darker areas. We've made some adjustments and lightened that up and made the board not quite as dark as you see it here, but it's pretty cool art. You can see Poseidon there, oops, and then over here you can see Hades. Athena is over there and she's a little bit obscured, and then you can't see anything of Zeus right there. So same thing for the cards. You can see it. We have some cards here. Excuse me. Let's see. I guess you can kind of see that. Looks like the iPad doesn't focus too well. But the cards are our artwork as well. What's not ours is we have these tiles here. We call them death tiles. These are used to kind of mark when you've been knocked out and are unconscious. They kind of hurt you a little bit later on. This is not our artwork. And then the minis aren't our artwork either. So we didn't sculpt these minis. We bought them. It's a really cool. I'm finding a little bit tough to focus with this iPad, but we thought that they were really cool. We did not realize they were as large as they are. We got them from a Russian company. But we liked them. The final artwork that we've designed is actually just kind of a bust for a Greek soldier's bust or a Greek hero bust. So more of a pawn than a miniature. And then let's see, what else should I show you? Oh, so the original. So I said that the concept that I had for the game itself came when I was a kid, but as we're putting together the game board and thinking about this, we liked something from Clash of the Titans where the gods are putting these pieces down on this kind of completely white board. Um, um, and manipulating, the fate of each of those pieces. So we kind of really liked that idea. So what we were, thematically, what we were going for is that you yourself are the god, you're Hades or you're Poseidon, and you're manipulating the fate of your different heroes. So, it's all fluff, I guess, but that's kind of what we were really going for here is just gods manipulating the fate of these heroes inside this labyrinth. So a couple other things. So let me talk about the tile laying. I've kind of got a game board laid out here, 3 or 4 turns into the game, just so you can kind of see what that looks like. Each of these tiles has various effects on them. This one's got a draw effect. This one's got what's called a draw in place and a discard effect. This one's got 2 draw effects and it's got an encounter effect. This one is, we lovingly refer to this as a chaos tile. It's got a draw, a rotate, a replace, and a draw in place. And I'll play that in just a few minutes so you can kind of see what that does. All of these tiles should kind of be pushed to your left, to the left in the rack, for a couple reasons. You can see that on this tile rack we've marked 1, 2, and 3. Okay? And so what happens is if you have 1 to 3 tiles in your rack, then you get 1 action. If you have 4 to 6 tiles in your rack, then you have 2 actions. Noted by that number there. And then if you have all 7 tiles in your rack, you have 3 actions. So it's a way to kind of limit the number of actions you have as you start depleting your tiles in your rack, which kind of makes sense in a way. This rack, I should have mentioned, not only is these the tiles that you use to build out your maze, it's also the tiles that you use for your actions, and it essentially represents your health as well. So once you get down to 0 tiles in your rack, you'll get knocked out. When you come to on your next turn, you'll draw back up to almost full, except for each time that you get knocked out, you get a death tile, which essentially takes up a space in your rack. There are potential ways to get rid of these death tiles, but it's kind of a semi-permanent addition to your rack. So now, as long as that death tile is in the rack, this player can never have more than 6 tiles total. Okay? So this represents your health. It represents the number of actions you can take. It also, the tiles themselves have colored backs, as you can see over there. There's some reds, greens, and yellows. Those represent which dice you can use during your turn. They're tough to see from this angle, but this is just because it's a prototype. In the final, you would definitely easily see the edges, the colored edges. And right now, we're giving everybody the ability to see which tiles, which type of tile each person has. So you have yellow, green, or red. But there's some thought amongst our group that maybe we don't want people to be able to see what each other person has. They can't see exactly what they have. They don't know what the effects are. They don't know if they're a straight tile or a corner or any of that. They just kind of can see, that player over there has 1 green tile, which probably has something good for them on it. It's got a draw or something like that. The yellow tiles tend to have rotates and that kind of stuff on it. And then the red tiles we call chaos tiles. They have, like this right here would be a red tile. It's got a lot of different effects on it that affect the board and the other players in a big way. But as you're playing, if you wanted to say use a yellow die, you would want to throw away, you would want to discard a yellow tile, which of course I do not have. So my options are limited. I can do a red, I can do a green, another red, or two other greens. So I can't get that yellow, but maybe I want to get two greens. So two green die. Of course, they've got blue, but that's just because I didn't have any other green stickers. To get the two green die, I would have to discard two green backs. Okay. Now these die are kind of stacked against you. I guess it's a matter of perception, because in some cases you want to roll low. So maybe in some cases you want to pick up a green die and use that. So the green die have 4 1s and 2 2s on it. So most of the time you're going to be rolling a 1. You can get a 2. Potentially that's the highest number you can get on these die. The yellows have 3 1s, 2 2s, and a 3. Okay, so the yellows, you can get more, a higher number using these. They're not terribly risky, so they're actually good to have. So sometimes you kind of want to make sure that you're holding on to yellow tiles. But it's one of those things. It's a risk versus reward. Do you want to discard that yellow tile? Do you want to place it on your map to use either the effect or maybe you need a straight tile and that's a straight tile, or do you want to save it so that you have these better rolls? The red dice have 3 3s on them and then 3 skulls. If you roll a skull, you discard a tile. You have ways to mitigate that as well, but generally speaking, if you roll a skull, you'll discard a tile. Otherwise, it's got 3 3s on it, so I just rolled that. I got a 3. That's really good for me. So it's risk versus reward. You are using a riskier die, but you have the potential to roll a big number. So big number relative to this game. So there are, like I said, there are ways to mitigate some of that damage. You have shields that you'll get on some of these encounter cards. You'll also have swords that you get on the encounter cards that add to your damage. So there's ways that you can kind of mitigate the dice a little bit, and we'll get into that. All right, so let's just do a mock turn. I have it set up for a 4-player game. It does work best as a 2 or 4-player game, although you can play it as a 3-player game. We also have some, interestingly enough, this design actually works out for cooperative play too. So right now we're focused on competitive play, but we have some options for testing out cooperative play as well. Rather than trying to beat somebody up with some of these effects, you kind of would have to think about how you're placing those tiles so that you could help out your teammates in a cooperative game. So again, we're not really going down that road quite yet. This is still, while we've got some really cool concepts here and mechanisms, mechanics, we still have some work to do. So, which is the whole purpose of this vlog. I want you guys to kind of see what we have, think about it, see what you like, see what you hate, be perfectly brutally honest with your feedback. We love that. Any artist is very comfortable, or should be very comfortable with honest feedback. So okay, so in my rack here I have 5 tiles. Okay, so I have to be a little bit careful about how I use these tiles, because once I get down to, if I get below 4, then on my next turn I'm only going to have 1 action unless somebody places a draw effect on me. So why don't I I'll take out this, let's just show you this one right here. So this is a draw effect, and this is a three-way tile. So I can use this in a couple of ways. If I'm looking at my map, you can see I could place it there, and that gives me a clear opening through here. You can kind of see these gray or black edges. Those are walls, and then we have our openings here. That is a little tough to see on these tiles at first, but that's the idea. The new artwork is much easier to see. You have a nice clear view of what your path is. I also noticed that this is turned incorrectly. I'm just going to go ahead and fix it. So I would have a clear path this way all the way up to there. So currently still on my start tile. I do have an effect on that tile that I placed down. It's a draw. The downside to placing this tile this way is that I don't have an opening here, and ultimately I'm trying to get to the center of the board. So maybe I don't want to place that there. Maybe I want to place it over here. That's not going to help me get to the center of the board, but it will give me a draw effect that I can use later. So I also could take this one back. Looking at my tiles a little closer, I also have this tile. So this has an encounter on it, but it's got two draws. So I could place this one down, and now I would have an opening to get towards the center. So I think I want to do that one instead. The effect for me, I'm the first player, so we start with the effect on me, and that is to draw a tile from the tile bag. Ideally, right now we have a communal tile bag, but we got a discard draw, which is a greenback. But the idea is that each person would have their own individual tile bags. Everybody would essentially have the same tiles in their bag, although that could change a little bit depending on what hero you're using. But you know, we just want to be careful with some balance issues there. All right, so that was my first action. I only get two actions, right? So I do want to kind of show you what a chain effect is using again using these what we're calling chaos tiles. That's not an official name for these things, but we just find that they do create a lot of chaos as we play, and so we want to kind of we just like that name for these. So for this one, I kind of want. I might want that draw because that draw allows me to kind of keep my tile rack full and not get down too low. So I think I'm going to place this in a way that allows me to get that draw. Why don't I place this here? So that's going to turn here, but there is a way that we could potentially rotate that tile later on so that it is beneficial to us. So let's go ahead and place that there. Now, we don't have this indicated on the tiles. This is just something that we know as developers developing this game, that anytime you put down a draw in place or a replace effect, so we have draw in place is the orange text there, and then we have a replace. Okay, anytime that we place those down, it's going to have an impact on what we're calling a chain. It's going to cause other tiles to come out at the same time, and those are going to have to be resolved in a very specific order. So the way that we keep track of that is we use these flags. So this will be the first tile in this chain, so we're going to give it a 1 flag. Okay, so we start by resolving the actions in turn order. So I get to draw a tile, so I'll reach into the bag and draw a tile. It is a red tile. You can see that I still have 5 tiles in my rack because I was being careful about using those draw effects. This player over here has a rotate effect. You can see there, rotate is pointing in their direction. So they have to rotate their active tile. Now their active tile is going to be the one that their pawn is on. So I'm going to go ahead and pick their pawn up. And the way that this works is you rotate the tile to the first legal position. And essentially there just has to be one opening that connects with another opening. So I would take this tile and I'd rotate it this way and put it back. And you can see that that's going to connect legally with that next tile. All right, so I'll put my pawn back here. And so they've done their rotate. The next effect is a draw in place. So draw in places cause other tiles to come out of the bag randomly and get placed on a board. So we'll draw a tile for that other player. This isn't me drawing the tile. This is going to be them because it's their effect. They'll draw a tile and it's a double draw. Okay? And so what they'll do is they'll take and they'll place that onto their board. I'll place this here. And that is going to get a number 2 flag because we haven't finished fully resolving this tile before going to resolve that tile. So we'll put a number 2 flag so everybody knows that that's the next tile that needs to be resolved in order. And so here we have one final effect. It's going to be on this player over here, and that's a replace. So replace, generally speaking, when we're talking about replacing or rotating tiles, then we're talking about our active tile. Active tiles are going to be the ones that our pawn are on. So I'll take this pawn and I'll take the tile that he was on, which is the 4-way discard, and I will discard that. And now he's got to replace that with a tile from his own rack. I can't see what those tiles are, but let me grab this one. Oh, I don't want to do a 4-way discard. So let's try this one. That's 2 rotates. All right, and let's do this one because this is allows us to continue that chain, and it brings out an encounter. So for this tile, he doesn't want to do an encounter because it could be risky. He's got 3 reds and 2 yellows, so he'd have to resolve that encounter with either some risky red dice or only 2 yellows to resolve the encounter, and he doesn't know what the next card in that deck is. So he's going to go ahead and change this up. He's going to place that encounter towards this player over here. So encounter is facing that direction. And he's going to get a draw and play again. Now this is the 3rd tile that's come out that we have to resolve in order. So we would take a number 3 flag here and we'd place it on that tile. And that finishes up this tile. We resolved all of the effects in turn order on that tile, so this flag would go back. Now we have 2 effects on that tile, on the number 2 flag, and that's going to be a draw in my direction and a draw in the opposite direction across from me. So I am the first player, so I will take and draw a tile for me out of the tile bag, and I'll place it in my rack. So that's really good for me because now I'm as full as I can get. I've got 6 tiles, so I'm actually in a good position right now. This player over here gets to draw as well, so I'll draw a tile out of their rack. They're getting a yellow tile. I'll reach across here, stick that in their rack, and so that resolves this number 2 flag. Okay, so now we have to go to our number 3 flag. Now I'm the first player, so the next player in turn order is going to get the encounter. So that's this player over here has an encounter. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a card off the top of the encounter deck, and that's going to be clearly a spider. We don't actually label, if you look at these cards, we haven't actually labeled what the creature is. What we've done is given you a little, kind of a Jumanji-ish little rhyme that kind of tells you what that creature might be. Now we're toying with the idea, this is something you guys can probably chime in about, is we don't want everything to be completely random, right? So we've tried to make things. This game can get kind of crazy. It's about a 90-minute game. It can get kind of crazy. So we try to, in all of the craziness, we want to give you control as much as we can. So the rhyme on this one says, 8 legs upon which it crawls, creeps silently on ancient walls. Its fangs are sharp, its venom strong. If its death you seek, it won't be long. All right. So we've been thinking about taking those rhymes and actually putting it on the other side of the card. So when it's in the encounter deck, you can actually see potentially what that next creature is going to be, which would probably work out really cool. Initially, because you really wouldn't know necessarily what that rhyme was referring to. But as you get to know the game, you would know more and more, what that is. So we could potentially just try and do an entire deck of unique monsters, but that's kind of crazy as well. But I think it'd be kind of neat because it'll allow you to, when you're getting an encounter, to kind of know if you should take that encounter. So maybe you want to place that effect towards you because you know what the next encounter is going to be. It also could maybe prepare you for that encounter. So say you know that there's a pretty strong creature there. Maybe you want to be prepared in case somebody puts an encounter effect on you, or in case we also have another deck that I haven't printed out, so we're not using it right now. But it's essentially a condition deck, and it's things that happen in the maze that affect everybody. Pulling out an encounter is one of those things. So this player has pulled out a spider, and so the dice that you see down here we're not using anymore. We kind of scrapped that, the purpose of those dice, so ignore that. But you can see that the strength in the upper left hand corner of this spider is a 2. So the way that we work out encounters is this strength is actually, this is the base strength for that spider plus its tier, the tier that you're on. So the deeper in the maze that you go, the more powerful the creatures become. Just kind of a thematic thing, but also kind of makes going deeper into the maze a little more dangerous. So you can see that here's tier 1, then tier 2, and then tier 3, tier 4, and tier 5. It's just essentially the number of blocks from your start tile to the center of the maze. So this guy is tier 3 plus 2, so that spider is a 5 strength. So you have to roll a 5 in order to beat it. That's essentially true. There are some caveats to that. So the spider is a 5, right? So you have to get this down 5 points in order to beat it. You can do that by 2 things. You can either just take all the damage, which would be 5 tiles, and you'll automatically defeat that spider. Obviously, you don't want to do that because that's 5. That's kind of a waste, right? So maybe I decide I want to discard a yellow tile, okay? Because I know that that's going to give me a few more options. There are 3 1s on that yellow tile, yellow dice, but there are also 2s and 3s. I also know maybe I want to. Let's see. I don't want to be too dangerous, but I could be risky and discard a red tile. That gives me a 50-50 chance of getting a 3. So let me discard that red tile, and then I'll discard a green tile as well. All right, so I'm getting 3 dice. I'm gonna get a yellow die, a red die, and then I'm gonna get a green die. All right. So if I roll these, so I actually got 3, 4, 5. So I did defeat the spider, which is awesome. If I didn't defeat the spider and say, let me see, say I had not used this red one, and say I had used this one. So I had, I would have had to discard 2 green tiles and a yellow tile to use these die, but I only have a 4 here. So the difference in damage is going to be 1, right? The difference between 4 and 5 is 1. So all I would do is discard 1 more tile out of my rack, and I've still defeated the creature, right? Because the total is still 5. And I would be able to take advantage of any of the benefits from that creature, which in this case, it's a shield right there at the bottom. So shield allows you to block damage later. But I didn't. I got lucky. I took a risk using a red die, and I defeated it without any problem. Okay, so I'll set that aside. Now that player over there is kind of weak, right? They have 2 tiles left in their rack, so they're pretty weak. So that was their encounter. This does not take as long. I'm explaining. It doesn't take as long as it seems, but we're still on my turn. Okay. I had 2 actions. I had placed my 2 tiles, but we still have this effect, this flag over here that we have to finish resolving. So there's a draw and play for this player. So that player would take and draw another tile out of their rack, and that is going to be a draw and a discard. So I'll take this. This guy defeated that creature, so he'll keep that. This is a draw and discard. This, realistically, this would get a 4 on it, but we've already finished this 3, so we can put that 3 back. The 4, we know that this is only a draw and a discard, so it's not going to bring out any other tiles. So we don't necessarily have to put that 4 on it, but this is the 4th tile in the chain. So this player is going to probably play this tile in a way that helps them. They don't really want to discard, although discarding, while it seems bad, it can actually be beneficial to you, and I'll explain that in a minute too. The problem is they don't have any way that they can place this in their board that allows them to take advantage of that discard. They may, they don't actually have a way to place it this way either, so they're kind of going to have to place it like this to try and get towards the center. So they're going to actually take that discard because they don't have a lot of options, and this way, this kind of gives them a path towards the center, so that's really their best option for that draw and play. So they're going to have to discard a tile, so let's actually get rid of, I saw this is a 4-way discard, let's get rid of that. And then this player over here gets a draw. You can see that draw is in their direction, so we drew a yellow tile that has a draw and an encounter on it. So we'll place this in their rack over here. All right. Now, I hope everybody I hope everybody doesn't mind the shaky cam. I'm not so used to videotaping, playing, and explaining at the same time. So I apologize for the shaky cam. I'm going to try and figure out a better way to handle that in the future. So that was my complete turn. The one thing I wanted to say is this is a recent rule change. Actually, it just came out of last session. But discards can be really detrimental to you. And so we wanted to give players a way to use those discards in their favor. So what we decided is it's tough as you're playing this because you want to be able to use those dice, but you have to discard a tile each time you use a die. So so you're already discarding a lot of tiles. So what we wanted to do is give you a way to actually be able to hang on to those dice, so that you have them in reserve, and don't necessarily have to discard a tile to get rid of it. So what we decided is that potentially, we still have to play test this out, right? But whenever you discard a tile, you have the potential of taking one of your dice and putting it into your reserve pool. This block right here is essentially, that's being reserved for your character. So your hero will actually have a small character sheet here where there are a few different things that you'll be able to do: acquire shields, acquire swords or attack bonuses, and be able to bank your die in reserve here. So by banking your die in reserve, say you bank that red die, now next time that you're in combat, you wouldn't have to throw away a red tile in order to access that red die. You could, you could just keep that in reserve and then pick this die up when you want to use it. So that would be good for combat. It would also be good. These draw effects allow you to draw a single tile out of the bag, but maybe you want to draw more. So maybe I say, okay, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to place this draw tile down here, and then I'm going to take this die out of reserve, and I'm going to roll it and see if I can get more tiles that I can draw. So I'd roll that, and in this case, this would allow me to draw 4 tiles, right? I rolled a 3 plus that 1 draw. That gives me 4 tiles I could draw out of the draw bag, the tile bag, and heal myself up. I actually didn't need that because I'm only down 1 tile if I play this, but that's how that would work. You could potentially save that die and maybe add it to a draw effect or an encounter combat effect, or so on and so on. All right, so my turn is essentially over. We would go over to this player and they would play their turn. I'll actually do that because that'll allow me to knock that player out and show you about these death tiles. This player already has a death tile, so they've been knocked out once. But let me go ahead and move over here. And looking at this, that's not going to work for me because the player is not going to get a death tile right now because all they have for effects in here are draw effects. So they're going to play this in the best way for them. They're trying to get to the center. So, and they only have 1 more spot to get to the center. So they probably would just take this draw tile here and they'd play this here, so that they have a direct route to the center of the game board. And that would allow them to draw a tile out of their bag randomly. I'm actually not looking at what I'm drawing. So they got a double rotate. They'd place that here. This other player here would also have a draw because they have that tile facing them. Draw this out of the draw bag. And I'd place this in their rack over there. Okay. So, so this player is going to want to move. I thought that they had a straight shot. They actually don't have a straight shot. They actually only had 1 action anyway, so they're not going to get another action. Just, you can see that there. They only had 2 tiles. That only gives them 1 action, so they're not going to have another action. Now maybe they had banked a yellow die, right? So when they played that draw effect, maybe they had banked this yellow die, and they said, okay, let me take this yellow die out of the bank, and I have a draw effect. I know I can draw 1 card. Let me see if I can add more cards to that. So this is a 1, so they would get to draw 1 more tile out of their draw bag, and add that to their rack. So that would give them 3 tiles. Had they rolled a 2, they'd be able to draw 2 tiles or 3 tiles total out of the draw bag, and they would have 4 tiles now. So you can see how having those banked die can help you kind of recover. So it's not necessarily bad if this player has not been knocked out, right? They have a completely open rack. So maybe they did decide, I just want to go ahead and be knocked out. So they play this last tile, that knocks them out for the round. Their turn is over. They would take one of these death tiles, they'd place it in their rack, like so, and then on their next turn, they'd be able to draw 6 tiles, draw back up, and continue as normal. So the first thing that they would do is draw back up, and they'd essentially have 2 turns, or 2 actions that they could take on their turn. So because their rack would have 6 tiles in it. So that's also an option. I think that we've been back and forth on this. I think that we may give players the ability to completely skip their turn and completely draw back up on their turn. Turns move fairly fast unless you get into a chain where you're doing replaces and draw in places and that kind of thing. So again, in most of our games, they're running 90 minutes, maybe a little bit over 90 minutes. There's a lot of conversation though in our games, either explaining the rules or talking about things that we could do better. Overall, the directional effects on the tiles really seem to work really well. We love the chains. Each of the players have an asymmetrical ability that we haven't really discussed, but essentially Poseidon has a movement ability, so they have a one-time ability where they can just move through walls. The idea that water can kind of seep through walls and kind of stuff. We just wanted to give a player, one player that asymmetric ability that allowed them more freedom of movement. Zeus has an ability that is based on the number of flags that come out in a chain. So the higher the chain, if it's a chain of 7 or 8, then they could really be able to use that power to their benefit. If it's low, if it's a 1 or a 2 in the chain, then they wouldn't be able to use that ability. I'm not going to say exactly what that ability is yet, but it's really based on that chain, thematically thinking, chain lightning, that kind of thing. Athena has an ability that's based, that allows her to greater combat ability. Again, it's a one-time effect. We may give players the ability to recharge those effects, but right now we basically give them just a one-time effect that they can use for their specific power. And then Hades is an interesting concept too. Hades' ability is based on the number of death tiles people have out in their racks. So if there are 5 death tiles, then they have their ability is going to have a 5 strength. So Hades is a very, very interesting ability. Can't access it right away, but maybe towards the end of the game that ability becomes much more powerful for him. So these are still initial concepts. We've toyed around with these abilities. What we found is certain players really like certain abilities. Like we have one player that always wants to be Hades. He just loves that ability. He likes taking and actually using discards on other players to kind of force them to put these death tiles into their racks. We have players that really like playing Poseidon, the Poseidon hero, because they have greater ability to move, a little bit more freedom of putting down tiles that aren't necessarily giving them the ability to move to the center, but because they will eventually be able to move through walls, they place those tiles in a more favorable way for the effects for them. It's always cool to the chains are really cool. So giving Zeus the ability to kind of use those chains and maybe force those chains to go higher. It's in his interest to make those chains really kind of build up. The colored flags don't necessarily matter. Initially they did, then we kind of scrapped that. It's just the way that we have this worked out is a game has 2 flags per player in the game. So with a 4-player game, you'd have 8 flags. With a 2-player game, you'd only have 4 flags. And then, in Athena, obviously just a very, combat-oriented god. We wanted to give her the ability to just be more effectual in combat. So that's essentially the game. We have one other thing that we're toying with that we're just kind of, we've been utilizing a kind of quote-unquote boss battle. At the end, you get to fight a Minotaur. We actually have a sculpture of a Minotaur that was sculpted in ZBrush. So we can, we're going to get a 3D print of that, and it's all set up for if we want to do molds and stuff, if we want to go with that. The Minotaur miniature that we have for the center, its only function is aesthetic. So that, keeping the cost of the game down, we might not utilize that. It's like I said, it's just an aesthetic, but it looks really cool in the center. So, yeah. The other thing that you'll notice, there is a white circle in the center with numbers around it. That was from an older concept where we were trying to get rid of the dice and just have very specific numbers that players would go around and they'd know exactly what number they're going to have coming up on their turn. But we didn't like that idea. We found it became a very kind of dull. We like the dice rolling. There is a little bit of risk versus reward with the dice rolling. We found that even though we were trying to go for more strategy based, it just wasn't as fun to know exactly what number was coming up on your turn. And some players honestly would get screwed with getting 1s or 0s every time. So yeah, we scrapped that. So that's completely irrelevant. Doesn't matter. So we're interested to hear what people have to say. Do you like the initial concept? What do you think about the way that the board looks right now? Do you see any issues arising from what I've told you? What do you think that maybe we could do better? Again, love feedback. Sometimes you have to take feedback with a grain of salt. See if it really applies to your vision of the game, or if it's something that you can apply. I just noticed that I'm filming. I probably should have been filming this in landscape. I'm filming it in portrait. I apologize for that. That was probably a stupid thing to do. I'll make sure that I change that up in the future. Let me flip this back around. All right. And so, yeah, that's Labyrinth. Labrys. That's what we have so far. The name Labrys is probably going to change. There was another. We found out later after we started kind of promoting this a little bit that somebody else had actually run a Kickstarter called Labrys, and it's funny because we originally thought that was not going to be a name that anybody else had used, but this person had created a Greek-themed tile laying game, and we just felt the similarities were too much. Even though they happened completely separately, we had no idea about that other game that was posted on Kickstarter. Mechanically, has nothing. It's not the same game at all. Had no tile effects. The only similarity really was that it was a tile laying game. So just out of respect for that other person, and to avoid any kind of problems with using that name, we're probably looking at changing the name. But for now, that's still what we're going with, Labris. I hope hope people find this beneficial. Hopefully we're going to start recording some of our gameplay sessions. Kind of wanted to get this out here and just give you an idea of what the rules are right now. And so going forward, when we have our playtest sessions and we make changes, you'll know where those changes are coming from. So awesome. Can't wait to do the next one with a full group. All right, thanks.